Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to this SIG webinar. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for this next hour. My name is John Powell, and I am the Director of Membership Development here at SIG. I have the pleasure of facilitating today's webinar entitled Aligning Due Diligence to Corporate Ethical Sourcing Goals, presented by our friends at LexisNexis. Before I proceed, I've got a couple of housekeeping and calendar items I would like to review with you. Today's webinar is meant to be interactive, but we are going to hold the Q&A till the end of the webinar, so please ask your questions throughout, and we will get to the questions at the end. Please type your questions in the Q&A box. We will try to get to all of them. Also, we'll be sharing the slides with everyone on the webinar, and we'll push them out to you at the conclusion of today's webinar. SIG's Global Summits. Our Global Summits are incredible three-day events with over 50 breakout sessions, multiple keynote speakers, entertainment, and endless networking opportunities, as well as executive roundtable and CPO programs. The next summit is in beautiful Carlsbad, California, October 18th through the 20th, with a golf scramble the afternoon the day before the summit. Global events are now being held in North America, EMEA, and the Asia-Pacific region. Attend one of our signature events or share them with your colleagues. Please check the website frequently for upcoming cities and current agenda. SIG hosts webinars on Tuesdays and Thursdays. You're on a webinar right now at 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Visit our website for a complete listing of upcoming webinars and register today. These are one-hour sessions on current thought leadership. And don't worry if you miss one, because in the SIG Resource Center, you can watch a pre-recorded webinar on demand at any time. We do house them for the last 3 years in the SIG Resource Center. Town hall teleconferences, these are held once a month on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. These are buy-side only open microphone events that bring a small group of executives together to discuss important topics. These sessions are never recorded, which allows for an extremely organic and natural exchange. Our next town hall is scheduled for September 14th, and it's titled The Myths and Reality of Procurement, Understanding and Improving Our Functional Reputation, presented by Linda Behan, Senior Vice President, Global Procurement at Iron Mountain. That's one you don't want to miss. Linda's a great presenter. Don't miss that one. SIG's peer-to-peer resource, this is an opportunity to ask top-of-mind questions for instant responses. Those inquiries go out on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and you don't have to be a SIG member to respond, so please help out a fellow SIG member when you see them. SIG's Resource Center, this is home to over 4,000 tools and templates, white papers and presentations, and research. Last but not least, SIG's Career Network. SIG's website offers a career network with postings for sourcing professionals and internship opportunities for all levels of employment. But just as a reminder, SIG is an excellent source for senior level opportunities. Contact us when you do have those opportunities so we can help facilitate those conversations. And last, and certainly not least, is the Student Talent Outreach Program. This program was designed to find tomorrow's supply chain professionals today, while students are still honing their skills and learning about the industry. At our most recent Global Summit in Orlando, we had students from Western Michigan, the University of Southern California, North Carolina State, and Arizona State. SIG's Global Executive Summits, these are semi-annual events with 350 to 400 decision makers in attendance. The entire summit agenda is already available online. Please take a look at the Fortune 500 and Global 1,000 companies slated to present. Global events. As SIG is gaining a more global footprint, please take a look at some of the upcoming global events. We've got symposiums in Toronto and London. The GBS Roadmap Series makes stops in Zurich, Switzerland, and Copenhagen, Denmark. Also, SIG will be hosting the Challenge the Future Awards program. This will be back in London on February 2nd and 3rd. If you have colleagues in any of these cities, please invite them to attend. SIG University is a new SIG program. It is an online curriculum offered to people of all levels in their sourcing careers who seek training opportunities. Each certification level consists of modules with interactive lessons and unit assessments. Each certification is valid for 5 years. The training is asynchronous, and we are currently enrolling for our next Certified Sourcing Professional class on September 19th. The next Certified Governance Professional course launches on October 25th. We also offer a self-paced option for those that just cannot commit to a hard start and stop date. We are offering an additional 25% discount for early enrollment, so please reach out to myself or any other SIG team member after the webinar, and we can provide more details. So this brings us to our presentation entitled Aligning Due Diligence to Corporate Ethical Sourcing Goals, and our presenter today is Karen Gray. She is a Senior Entity Due Diligence and Monitoring Specialist with LexisNexis. Karen is a 22-year LexisNexis veteran. She serves as LexisNexis's expert and central point person for all due diligence and third-party monitoring solutions. She is a resource for benchmarking, market intelligence, strategic, category management, and vendor selection, and focuses on efforts to improve profitability and cash flow, risk mitigation, and operational efficiencies with regard to vendor selection and monitoring. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Karen. Karen, welcome, and take it away.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening as well. Thank you, John and SIG, for the warm welcome. Allow me to take a moment to introduce LexisNexis to you. LexisNexis is known as a leading global provider of content-enabled workflow solutions. We serve many markets in more than 175 countries with over 10,000 employees worldwide. With billions of searchable documents in legal, news, and business sources, LexisNexis aims to improve productivity, increase profitability, and stimulate growth. So what is ethical sourcing? Ethical sourcing means ensuring that the products being sourced are created in safe facilities by workers who are treated well and paid fair wages to work legal hours. It also implies that the supplier is respecting the environment during the production of and manufacture of products. As governments, NGOs, and consumers alike push for greater corporate responsibility, the pressure to conduct expanded due diligence mounts. Consider this: where does ethical sourcing fit into your due diligence process? We've defined ethical sourcing, but let's put some framework around 4 key benefits to ethical sourcing. Ethical sourcing keeps organizations aligned with a growing number of modern slavery laws. Ethical sourcing mitigates other legal risks. Ethical sourcing satisfies growing consumer expectations for their brands. And lastly, ethical sourcing makes companies more attractive to employees. Mitigating risk is an overarching feat in today's global business landscape. Sourcing professionals must consider numerous risk factors, whether they're political, economic, social, technological, legal, or environmental. There's a potential influence on other business avenues beyond procurement. This could indicate any sort of financial instability. This could also look at employees that are owned and operating institutions that lead to some sort of anti-bribery or corruption or compliance failures. So regardless of our take on ethical sourcing, and in a quest to answer those larger questions that sometimes we've not brought forth to mind, consider this: make ethical sourcing a part of your due diligence and ongoing monitoring process. Let's discuss the tenet of ethical sourcing, keeping organizations aligned with a growing number of modern slavery laws. California's Transparency in Supply Chains Act of 2010 and the UK Modern Slavery Act of 2015 could soon be joined by the End Modern Slavery Initiative Act, currently under consideration by the U.S. Congress. Now, starting in 2012, California law required that certain large companies disclose to the public the extent of their efforts, if any, to ensure that the goods that they sell are not produced by workers who have been enslaved, coerced, or otherwise forced into service, or who have been the victims of human trafficking. And many companies doing business in California already post disclosures about human trafficking on either their public-facing website or in their financial status reports. The Transparency in Supply Chains Act is slightly different. The Act did not regulate a company's labor practices, nor did it require companies to reveal confidential, proprietary, and/or trade secret information. Instead, it requires businesses subject to the law to simply disclose their sourcing practices so that interested consumers can make better informed purchasing decisions. So the law applies to businesses that do business in California that have an annual worldwide gross receipt over $100 million and are identified as manufacturers or retail sellers in their California state tax returns. Now let's talk about the Modern Slavery Act. It's an act out of the UK. It was designed to tackle slavery in the UK and consolidates offenses related to trafficking and slavery. And the act was designed, quote, to send the strongest possible message to criminals that if you're involved in this disgusting trade in human beings, you'll be arrested, you'll be prosecuted, and you will be locked up, end quote. The draft behind the bill included no measures to counter the use of slave labor abroad. The slave labor abroad was believed, the tenets around that were believed to be asking businesses to audit and report on their modern slavery. And that was viewed as, quote, an additional burden to measures outside of the home office, if you will. However, recent campaigning has resulted in a supply chain clause being added to the bill so that, quote, big businesses will be forced to make public its efforts to stop the use of slave labor by its suppliers. Now, the most recent initiative is the End Modern Slavery Initiative Act of 2015. There's a staggering statistic here in that 27 million people are trapped in the multi-billion-dollar modern slave trade industry. Although slavery is illegal in every corner of the world, the crime of opportunity exists in more than 165 countries, including the U.S., and thrives where mostly the enforcement is weak or whether there is indifference to enforcement. There could also be corruption and lack of resources, as we have seen. Now, while U.S. government agencies and many groups and organizations have taken really significant steps toward fighting modern slavery, the U.S. can't meet the challenge alone. So there has been introduced some bipartisan legislation that focuses on the sustained effort in the private sector where foreign governments can eliminate and should eliminate sexual and labor human slavery worldwide. This model is leveraging limiting foreign aid dollars to these institutions. So this effort will complement other legislation focused on improving enforcement within the U.S. These modern slavery laws require that companies above a certain threshold include an annual statement on their website indicating 5 things: organizational structure, including its supply chain, policies regarding slavery and human trafficking, due diligence processes in order to look and identify modern slavery risks. Also identifying on the website that steps that have been taken to mitigate these risks. And finally, training available to employees regarding modern slavery. If a company fails to comply, a court order can be issued to force the company to publish a statement. The bigger threat is really that consumers and investors will draw support for a company that declines to be transparent on any motions of slavery or human trafficking in its supply chain. And really, unethical and unfair practices inevitably catch the attention of regulators, as we've seen. Even if no current law exists today to address the issue, there could very well be one coming down the road. The next tenet is ethical sourcing mitigation and mitigating other legal risks. Recall, if you will, the case of lumber liquidators. The CDC a few years ago announced that people who purchased certain types of their laminate flooring had a greater risk of cancer and respiratory issues. Why? Because the China-made flooring contained carcinogenic materials and formaldehyde. In an unrelated recent matter, however, lumber liquidators reached a criminal settlement involving $13 million in penalties and a 5-year probation after acknowledging it was guilty of illegally importing wood from forests that are home to endangered species. Lumber liquidators said in a statement that it remains, quote, committed to operating with integrity and delivering quality flooring to our customers, end quote. Now, just last year, a California consumer filed suit against Costco and its U.S.-based distributor after slavery in Thailand's fishing industry came to light. The lawsuit alleges that Costco's transparency statement is contradicted by the fact that one of their third-party suppliers sources farmed prawns that are fed cheap fish caught by unpaid forced labor. And according to the complaint, quote, Costco publicly represents that it does not tolerate human trafficking and slavery in its supply chain, yet it continues to purchase tainted farmed prawns from defendant CP Foods. Any representation by Costco that slavery in the supply chain is not allowed is simply false, end quote. The company has since seen its stock price drop and consumer confidence in their products decline after the lawsuit was filed. Let's move it to the garment industry. A garment factory in Bangladesh collapsed, and it killed more than 1,000 workers. And a number of larger retailers, besides the Gap, found themselves embroiled in legal fallout because the factory's wares, they were filling their own clothing racks. And so 2 years later, after this collapse, many multinational companies have changed their business practices. However, the Gap still has stubbornly refused to alter its business policies in Bangladesh and sign an agreement claiming that a concession will present any sort of liability to its company and potential litigation in the United States. Let's talk about the value of the brand. Ethical sourcing satisfies a growing consumer expectations for the value of a brand. There's a Nielsen study that was issued in 2014, and it suggests that 55% of global online consumers value brands that commit to and actively pursue positive social or environmental impact, and so much so that they're willing to pay more for ethically sourced products. One of their global leaders of sustainability at Nielsen said, and she's quoted, consumers around the world are saying loud and clear that a brand's social purpose is among the factors that influence purchasing decisions, end quote. While price still matters, of course, in a competitive marketplace, ethical sourcing could be a game changer, particularly, as Nielsen notes, among millennial consumers. Ethical sourcing makes companies more attractive to employees. There's a study issued by the Society for Human Resources Management, and it found that companies with corporate social responsibility programs enjoy 55% better morale, enjoy 43% more efficient business processes, 43% stronger public image, and 38% higher employee loyalty. When we're recruiting and retaining top talent, it's an ever-present challenge for companies. Of course, these factors translate to a financial bonus, and that as productivity climbs, employee turnover declines, saving in the event company losses. So how do you get close to recognizing the benefits of ethical sourcing? We encourage enhanced due diligence programs, and some of the recommendations that we'll dive a little deeper in today are threefold. Staying alert to government sanctions, watch lists, politically exposed parties, to mitigate the risks of conducting business with unethical third parties. Second, using in-depth industry and country risk analysis reports to evaluate potential environmental, bribery, or forced labor risks. And lastly, as part of an enhanced due diligence program, we encourage the reviewing of legislative and litigation histories, the tracking of negative news, to improve awareness of a third party's potential to cause reputational damage. So let's take the first tenet, staying alert to government sanctions, watch lists, and PEPs. Your organization can suffer reputational damage or be subject to monetary penalties, government sanctions, civil suits, and enforcement actions by any number of various regulators if you're found to be working with individuals or entities that appear on sanctions lists, watch lists, blacklists, even lists of excluded, disqualified, or debarred persons or organizations. Government sanctions and watch lists are generated from multiple authorities, both domestic and international, and there are upwards of 800 or so different watch lists that originate from more than 75 countries worldwide. Some of the more commonly known watch lists include OFAC, an FBI most wanted list, debarred companies, the OCC, designated terror lists, and FINRA. But some of those lesser-known lists include or involve things like white-collar crime, slave labor, stock manipulation, and disqualified directors. When you take note of PEP, or politically exposed people, a PEP is someone who serves or has served in a prominent public function, or it's an individual who's closely tied to such a person. And by virtue of their position and the influence that they may hold, a PEP presents a higher risk for potential involvement in corrupt activity, including bribery. Let's visit the energy giant Petrobras, where political kickbacks plague not only a company, but the Brazilian economy and political structure as well. A simple corporate affiliation parent-subsidiary structure of Petrobras reveals multiple levels of subsidiaries, affiliates, and shell companies. And furthermore, under the umbrella of grand corruption cases, there is an indication of anonymous companies, human rights abuses, and a scale of corruption with this energy giant. Now, Petrobras was already on a sanctions list for, quote, possible irregularities in connection related to the election of members of their management board, end quote. Well, at the center of their scandal is one Paulo Roberto Costa, and he is the former director of supply of Petrobras. He has admitted through a whistleblower agreement that he requested his own daughter to take away $50,000 in cash from his business the day that the federal police went to his home to fulfill a search warrant. He confirmed that this money came from bribes received through Petrobras. An elaborate web of subsidiaries, bribes, and money laundering found its way to the states and finally into a refinery in Pasadena, Texas. Corruption around the world, countries around the world are tightening up their anti-bribery and their corruption laws in an effort to combat such issues. There is stringent enforcement of one such law, and you might be familiar with the U.S. FCPA, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and it's added greater emphasis to the identification of PEPs. Regulators now require a higher degree of due diligence when conducting business with PEPs, and failure to perform adequate due diligence can expose your organization to reputational damage, multi-million-dollar fines, and vast legal costs. When a securities firm or an individual working in the securities industry violates FINRA or New York Stock Exchange rule requirements, engages in stock manipulation, fraud, deceptive practices, any other non-compliant behavior, you may be subject to arbitration proceedings or disciplinary actions. Make certain that the actions that you learn of any history of wrongdoing, suspicions, debarment, anything that limits or that contradicts your decision to move forward is audited and kept on file. Let's talk about using in-depth industry and country risk analysis to evaluate potential environment, bribery, or any sort of forced labor risks. Take a note of these countries. These countries have the strongest response to modern slavery. They're alphabetically sorted. Otherwise, the sort order is not important here. But we look at Australia, Belgium, Croatia, Norway, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and the United States. So using in-depth industry and country analysis reports elevates the countries that are strong in their response and potentially doing things correctly. But let's look at the other side of that list. The governments that are taking the least action against modern slavery, and again, only an alpha sort, is the Central African Republic, the DRC, Equatorial Guinea, and so forth, all the way down through South Sudan. So you may ask yourself, well, how do I get country risk analysis? There are many open market sources for that. I'm going to highlight two that I'm quite familiar with today. DNB Country Risk Line Reports is a regular information source that evaluates cross-border risks and opportunities around the globe. And you can look at how DNB scores a company, whether it presents a country, whether it presents a moderate risk, an overall credit rating, what that outlook looks like going forward, and you can review that in full text. Now, the other side of the coin is the EIU, the Economist Intelligence Unit. And so as you're moving forward with your global footprint, what are the risks of investing in a particular country? EIU brings an exclusive 2-year forecasting service to its company reports in the solvency of developing and highly indebted countries. And EIU's focus is on predicting growth, but also budget deficits. It looks at trade and current accounts. It looks at foreign financing requirements and sources, and it also looks at debt service. So while you may be entering into an agreement today with a foreignly housed company, look down the line and see where in 2 or 3 years that country sits with a reputable industry and or country analysis report. Sometimes EIU will surface the country's economic creditworthiness, and looking at that both in short and medium term is quite important. Again, there are other country risk and industry analysis reports available on the open market, but enhanced due diligence toward a more ethical sourcing initiative is what's key and bottom line here. Let's move to litigation histories and tracking negative news to improve awareness of third parties and their potential to cause reputational damage. As you're evaluating litigation histories and tracking negative news, an understanding of that history could produce a likelihood of future legal entanglements, which again could be costly in terms of legal fees, settlements, or punitive damages. Litigation also finds its way to disrupting business effectiveness, and it creates sometimes an executive team that could be distracted from their primary operations. When vetting a potential business associate, it is important to determine if that entity or its officers has a history of any particular type of litigation that could be recurring. And this could be unfair labor practices, it could be patent disputes. The brushstroke is wide here. You'll also want to take note of any open lawsuits whose outcome could materially impact the value of that entity or your decision as whether to proceed with that transaction. The result of
Karen, can I interject for 1 second?
Certainly.
Karen, I apologize. I know you wanted to ask the questions at the end, but just one quick one if I could just interject, because I think a few people would ask this one. Can you touch on what is a PEP again? I've had a few people ask that one, and I didn't want to go any further until if you could retouch on that one.
Nope, absolutely, and I might have covered that quite quickly. So a PEP is known as a politically exposed person, or PEP might also be politically exposed people. And those are people who have served or continuously serve in a prominent public function. So let's take if I'm the Minister of Energy for a foreign country, I have access to those who make the laws, make the regulation. Doesn't mean that I'm a bad person, but it does mean that I'm exposed politically by my position and could influence any sort of potential motion that could lead to bribery, corruption, halting growth for a company that wants to, let's say, build a warehouse or build a call center or build a stadium or whatnot. So politically exposed people are just that. It could be something as simple as someone who's married to a Secretary of State, or who's the brother-in-law who happens to be in business with a foreign minister or someone who heads up some sort of body that typically is regulated in an industry that is overseen by the government. Does that help? I hope it does. If not, please submit a subsequent question and we'll go again.
It certainly helped me. I have to be honest with you, that was the first time I'd heard that, so that was a very good explanation, and thank you very much, and please continue on. Thank you, Karen.
No problem. Keep them coming. So let me go back to litigation. So as we're understanding an entity's litigation history or the potential of litigation history, we may have mature companies that we're looking at. We also may have immature companies that we're looking at. So regardless, we're looking to gain a general impression of a business practice or a target. If the company is mature and they haven't been involved in any sort of significant litigation, then there's probably a positive impression on how that target runs his business. However, a significant amount of litigation or a pattern that involves things like claims of fraud or corruption or even human rights violations, that should indeed raise concerns. We call those red flags, or we might call that criticality, if you will, but that should raise concerns about a company's business practices and really require you to do some additional due diligence and conduct that thoroughly. Now, I want to talk about agency decisions. Sometimes this is the brother in the corner, so to speak. Agency decisions rise from proceedings by an agency to enforce its statutes and regulations. So you may look at a company and say, well, Karen, they don't have case law, they don't have reported decisions, they don't have anything that went to trial. A governing body, an agency, if you will, is just as impeding, just as heavy as a case is in a court of law. And these agency decisions can be very costly and disruptive to an organization. So like a court case, agency decisions can be telling about the nature of a company's operations, including unethical business practices. Again, we service bribery, forced labor, human trafficking, the use of conflict minerals. What if they're dumping toxic materials into the water source? Well, there's a department that oversees that, whether that is local or global. And again, any sort of corrupt method might be identified from an agency well before a trial comes to bear, a court case gets filed. So again, these are equally binding with regard to civil or criminal enforcement actions, disgorgements, fines, penalties, sanctions, etc. The last one on this list here is out-of-court settlements. And you may say, well, Karen, if it's a big out-of-court settlement, I'm probably going to read about it in the news. But think about out-of-court settlements in this way. It could determine a pattern of litigation. If I keep settling out of court for defective products to consumers, it could be an indication that my company is not a reputable supplier, and frankly, there might be mutual suffering for ongoing payouts of settlements. The money has to come from somewhere if I'm paying my claimants out of court. Second note for out-of-court settlements, we need to determine the source of those funds or even the net worth of an individual. For example, if we've got a guy named John Smith and he's employed in a low-level position, but we find that he has significant amount of funds to invest if he's opening, let's say, a new financial account, it could be that John has found himself on the receiving end of a large cash settlement. So enhanced due diligence tells us, hey, let's go look at John Smith, see the source of this cash settlement. Is he a frivolous lawsuit filer? Does he slip and fall with great regularity? And it could be leading us to other issues like bribery, corruption, and or money laundering. The last tenet of an out-of-court settlement in determining the outcome of unpublished cases. We can look at a number of things here that we've listed here, but think about consumer banking, fraud, criminal action, discrimination. Think about drug trials gone awry. And so when out-of-court settlements are used to pay off those that would otherwise talk, there are certain parameters in place sometimes that we see with out-of-court settlements that do not allow or that provide for a gag order. So sometimes the litigation history doesn't always find its way into the news of the courtroom, and we again surface the motion to look at out-of-court settlements as a source for litigation history. Now let's wrap this up with talking about a pattern of adverse media. Regulators now more than ever are recommending the inclusion of adverse news searches as part of a complete or an enhanced due diligence program. So I offer up to you, search globally, search English as well as non-English language sources, especially if your footprint is global. Something may come out in a local news outlet or a local media outlet that is not English as a first language, or we have a hard time translating. Make certain that we hit all points on English and non-English sources. Make certain when you're looking at adverse media that we check not only public but private companies. We're looking for terms of art that are associated with these companies in your supply chain, regulatory issues, enforcement issues, compliance issues. Most of us on the phone today represent different industries where someone in a drug capacity or a pharmaceutical capacity might be more concerned with trials or mad cow. Someone over in a manufacturing may be more in line with conflict minerals and mining. So look for derogatory names in your enhanced due diligence, names that insinuate things like embezzlement, fraud, indictment, bankruptcy, any kind of money laundering, or the anti of any one of those. When you look to your news media sources, be that on the open web or from a subscriber motion like LexisNexis or any of our competitors, think about how you will treat false positives. Invariably, we are at the mercy of the writer of such news. We are at the mercy of the language patterns that the bylines submit for open consumption. So think about how your company will treat false positives, the sentiment, the tone of an article. And if there's not already a scoring model in place, think about what scoring model you have and what adverse media plays to that scoring model. Do we take that at face value? Is there a threshold of acceptability to where if these certain terms of art are mentioned in close proximity to this company, this third party, does it negate our motion to move forward and such? So give some thought to that as you interact with your due diligence partners, as those in the analytics department would certainly need to do. As we talk about, or in summary, of the benefits of ethical sourcing, I'd like to lead you to this. By committing to a due diligence process, one that even encompasses ongoing monitoring, take a look at your ethical sourcing risks. Companies that achieve this ethical sourcing model or have taken into account the tenets that we propose here have a competitive advantage. I'm going to quote Warren Buffett, who says that it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 5 minutes to ruin it. If you think about that, he is further quoted, you will do things differently. Consider the potential advantages that you have in implementing an ethical sourcing program. It's time to think, it's time to act, and if so, it is time to act differently. As we move into question and answers, maybe some that have surfaced through the web portion or maybe some that you are waiting to the end of your session, right after we move to questions and answers, there will be an opportunity, an open poll, if you will, to receive a white paper in support of our presentation day. So if you'd like to sit tight for the questions and answers, we'll put the posed question on top of the screen here with a way that you can get a hold of that white paper that's issued by LexisNexis. So John, I'll go to you as moderator.
Sure.
Have there been any other questions that have surfaced during the course of the presentation?
Yeah, I've got quite a few, so let's dive right in, and we'll
Okay.
hopefully we can get to all of them in our time allotted. So
Okay,
I'm going to go
good.
back
Thank you,
all
dear.
the way all the way back to an earlier slide, one of the first ones, as you had mentioned. After discussing the British law around enslavement, there was a bullet around another enslavement regulation law. Was that in the U.S.? Is a more specific reference available to U.S. rules around ethical sourcing?
Yeah, that slavery law is actually in process. It sits before the U.S. Congress now. It is the End Modern Slavery Initiative Act. And that act is in the U.S. It has been met with bipartisan support. And essentially what it's trying to do is limit the foreign aid dollars that are given to countries who do not comply with the tenets surrounding the abolition of slavery in whatever country you're in. And so, of course, it was introduced in 2005. The Congress, the U.S. Congress, is trying to, in their words, galvanize the support and the investment, not only from the public sector, but philanthropic organizations and the private sector where crime is most prevalent. And so essentially, our legislation, our U.S. Congress, is trying to focus the improving of the enforcement of slavery, not only in the U.S., but counter to that in foreign nations where aid financially would be limited to those countries. It's a bit of a slippery slope, but that's what's sitting in Congress today.
Sure is a slippery slope, isn't it? Okay. Well, just a quick reminder to our attendees, if you do have a question, we still have time to submit your questions in the Q&A box. So I'm going to move on to our next question.
Great.
This person asked us, is there a list of countries with ranking for most active presence of slavery? And they put in there, I know the U.S. is said to have a humongous presence of modern-day slavery. I'm interested in the correlation of presence of slavery to active enforcement to end it.
Wow, great question. There was a slide earlier, and at least in my research for the purpose of today's call, where we discuss the countries that are diligently acting on our anti-slavery issues, forced labor issues. There is, and I don't have the site handy, but we did have those with strongest, Australia, Belgium, Croatia, Norway, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, the Netherlands, the U.S., and the U.K. Unfortunately, the list goes with the top, and it did the bottom. Of the 200 or so countries that we have, we've got the 10 best players and the 10 least players. But those taking least action against our modern slavery are typically in Africa. There are some in the Asia-Pacific Rim, whether that's Hong Kong, North Korea, Sudan and Iran have certainly rounded out that list. I don't have a complete listing of how all 200 and something countries fare in that. The research that I've done really eliminates the middle and focuses on both ends of that spectrum. So I'll apologize for not having access to a decent list of all 200 plus countries in the world.
No problem. Well, we're going to move right along. I still have several questions in queue. So the next one up is, have any companies been litigated by California or the UK for violations of their respective laws?
Oh, there have. If you are not already part of the FCPA blog, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act blog, it's a blog that monitors countries as well as companies and their foreign corrupt practices. It is a source that I subscribe to. You can set that up in your email to deliver. A lot of the information that I either support, some of these studies that are referenced today, will give us insight to those types of questions. So again, let me recommend setting some sites on the FCPA blog or that email or RSS feed to supplement that understanding.
Perfect, thank you. Here's another quick one that just came in. Can you please can you please rename the countries with high risk for bribery/forced labor?
Absolutely. Okay, so in alphabetical order, Central African Republic, the DRC is second. That's the Democratic Republic of Congo. Equatorial Guinea, Eritrea, Eritrea, Guinea, Hong Kong, Iran, North Korea, Papua New Guinea, and South Sudan.
Well, thank goodness nobody asked us to spell some of those. I do have another question that just came in. Which organization will be charged with enforcement of the End Slavery Act just discussed?
Which agency? Is that what you said?
Yeah, organization or agency, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I assume it will go under one of the agencies in the cabinet. And, you know, as we well know, this is an election year, so I don't think that that has been defined as of yet. I know that the bill is still under what I would say, you know, iterations of that bill back and forth between the Senate. So I don't have that. If that comes to pass in the next couple, John, what if I publish maybe a follow-up to that on LinkedIn and in the SIG group, or maybe we could send that out through Mary.
Great.
Just as we could send that out to Mary Zampino. Most of the people on this call probably know Mary, and maybe it could just be a follow-up answer or an update status as this bill gets some traction. And I would take notice and ownership of that.
I think that would be absolutely great. And if those of you that aren't familiar with Mary Zampino, you can join our LinkedIn group, whether you're a member or not a member, buy side or sell side, you can join the SIG LinkedIn group. So if you have any questions on how to do that, reach out to me afterwards. And I've got another question that came in. You've definitely hit on a relevant note here, Karen. We've got a lot of questions in queue still. So
all right.
The next one, do you recommend conducting due diligence on all suppliers when they are onboarded and then maintaining them within a watch list?
Yeah, I sure do. And, you know, we talk about a second party, a third party, a customer's customer, a third party's third party. I don't think that any of us on phone, you know, whether you're buy side, sell side, it makes no matter. I don't think any of us are strong-armed enough to say that somewhere down the line we didn't source either unethically or from someone who was on a sanctions list. The myriad number of enforcement activities that need to be postured, whether that's in our own government or others. You heard me earlier say that, you know, resources can only do so much. Again, 24 hours in a day, you know, 8 hours on a work day, et cetera. There's so much opportunity for that corruption that just can't surface based on manpower. We do have, or at least in my research, companies in some industries that would rather pay the fine than invest up front. And I found that maybe just as a dovetail to, you know, there are certain industries that are more combative, more or less likely to change. We find that in construction and retail. Sorry for my, you know, brothers and sisters in those industries, but those tend to be lagging adopters. You know, they tend to, you know, look at and say, you know, who moved my cheese? I'm a slow adopter. On the other side of that, however, our energy companies and our automotive industries seem to be leading the charge on researching suppliers, and to the nth degree of the relationships that would otherwise cause us reputational or some sort of damage to our, you know, to our own company brand. John, are there others? All right. John may not have any other questions. I do want to, in case somebody else is typing or rather slowly, I do want to put the polling question up here that says, would you like to receive a copy of the white paper issued by LexisNexis? It is a greater understanding of the UK Modern Slavery Act and how that new law impacts global business. It does address anti-human trafficking. So if you'd like to do that, simply say yes. We'll keep the poll open for about 30 seconds or so. If you say yes, by registration with your email address, that is going to be used for the delivery of that particular Modern Slavery Act white paper. As we round out the poll, and John, again, if other questions are coming in, I do, on behalf of LexisNexis, want to thank you all for attending. We have a couple of ways to follow us online as well for issues pertinent to supply chain, procurement, and sourcing. My contact information is also up here on screen if there's a question that you'd like to take offline or approach me about an issue that we covered in the presentation. John, with about 10 minutes, I will turn it back over to you now.
Hi, Karen. This is Snehal Sindvad speaking with SIG. It appears that John is having some technical issues with his
all right.
phone.
You want me to pass the ball to you then and let us close out, or you have other questions?
Yes. No, I think that would be fine. Once again, folks, we want to thank LexisNexis for presenting another webinar with us. Fantastic information, Karen. Another great delivery. Folks, the presentation will be sent to you guys as well as the recording of today's presentation. You should be seeing that in an email tomorrow. And stay tuned for other webinars coming up, okay? We have one with Outsource tomorrow. It's episode 6. And then we have one again on Thursday, okay? So, folks, tune in. Thank you very much for joining. And, Karen, thanks again. It was a great topic and a great presentation.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.
Karen, are you there?